Marcus woke up earlier than usual that morning, and for the first time in many months, he felt a spark of hope that warmed his entire heart. The sunlight filtered through his small apartment window, painting the walls in a soft golden color, and he allowed himself to smile. Today was not an ordinary day. Today was the day of the interview he had been dreaming about for so long. He had applied to countless jobs over the past year, and most of the time, he never even heard back. But this time was different. This was a big company, one with a reputation for growth, opportunity, and fairness. He had received the invitation for the interview a week ago, and since then, he had thought of little else. He sat up slowly on his bed, stretched, and whispered a short prayer of thanks. He knew how much this opportunity meant, not just for him but for his future. Marcus had grown tired of struggling paycheck to paycheck. Temporary jobs and small errands had kept him afloat, but he was ready for something more stable, something that would allow him to stand tall and say he was building a future for himself. His clothes for the interview were already laid out neatly on a chair in the corner of the room. He had ironed the shirt twice the night before, making sure there wasn't a single wrinkle. The suit was not new, in fact, it had been given to him by an older cousin years ago. But he had taken good care of it, and with a little polish on his shoes, he looked sharp. He wanted to make the best impression possible. He brushed his hair carefully, checked his tie in the mirror, and gave himself a small nod. Today, he said softly to his reflection, is going to be different. He picked up his briefcase, which wasn't much but carried the most important item he had, his resume. He had read through it so many times, trying to imagine how the hiring manager might react. It wasn't filled with the most impressive list of jobs, but what he had, he presented with honesty. He believed that his determination, his willingness to work hard, and his steady character would shine through. The air outside was fresh, with a cool breeze that carried the sounds of the city beginning to wake up. People hurried along the sidewalks, cars moved steadily down the streets, and Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger. His heart beat quickly with nervous excitement, and though his palms were slightly sweaty, he held his briefcase tight. As he walked toward the bus stop, he thought about what questions they might ask him. He had practiced in front of the mirror, "Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? What are your strengths?" He repeated his answers silently, making sure his words sounded clear and confident. He knew he wasn't perfect, but he also knew that if given the chance, he would work harder than anyone else. While waiting at the stop, Marcus glanced at his watch. He was well ahead of time, which gave him comfort. He hated the thought of being late, especially for something as important as this. His mother had always told him that being punctual was a sign of respect, and he carried that lesson with him everywhere. As the bus rolled in, Marcus climbed aboard and found a seat near the window. He looked outside, watching the buildings pass, and let his mind drift. He imagined himself in a crisp new office, maybe at a desk with his own computer. He pictured himself shaking hands with new colleagues, learning, growing, and building a career. The thought filled him with energy. He wanted to call his mother after the interview, to tell her how it went, to hear her voice cheer him on. She had always believed in him, even in the moments when he doubted himself. The bus ride was smooth, and soon Marcus got off at his stop. From there, it was just a short walk to the company building. He had studied the directions carefully the night before, making sure he knew the exact route. He walked with steady steps, holding his head high. His mind was focused, his heart eager. Every step felt like he was walking toward a brighter future. But life has a way of placing unexpected moments in the path of even the most prepared person. As Marcus turned a corner, he noticed a car pulled over by the side of the road. The hood was open, and steam seemed to rise faintly from it. A woman stood nearby, pacing with her phone in her hand. She looked frustrated, maybe even worried. Marcus slowed his pace. He looked at his watch again. He still had time, though not as much as before. He hesitated. A voice inside told him to keep walking, to stay focused on the interview. After all, this was his chance, and he couldn't risk missing it. But another voice, the stronger one in his heart, reminded him of who he was. He had been raised to help people when he could. He knew what it felt like to be stranded, to need a hand. He took a deep breath, then walked toward the woman. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "Do you need help with your car?" The woman looked up, relief flashing in her eyes. "Yes, I don't know what's wrong. It just stopped, and I can't get it started again. I've been trying to call someone, but no one's picking up." Marcus put his briefcase down carefully on the sidewalk and rolled up his sleeves. "I'm not a professional mechanic," he admitted, "but I know a little about cars. Let me take a look." She stepped aside, and Marcus leaned over the open hood. The smell of burnt oil and heat greeted him. He studied the engine, adjusting a few things here and there. His hands worked quickly but carefully, remembering the lessons his uncle had once taught him about fixing old cars. As he worked, he thought again of his interview. Time was moving, and he knew he couldn't stay too long. But when he glanced at the woman's anxious face, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He focused harder, determined to help her. The minutes ticked by. His shirt, once crisp and clean, now had faint smudges of grease. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but he ignored it. Finally, after adjusting a loose cable and tightening a small part, he told the woman to try starting the car again. She climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and to her surprise, the engine roared back to life. Her face lit up with relief and gratitude. She stepped out quickly, smiling. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done without your help." Marcus gave a small smile, wiping his hands with a handkerchief he carried. "I'm glad it worked," he said simply. "Drive safe." He picked up his briefcase again, ready to continue his journey. But when he checked his watch, his heart sank slightly. More time had passed than he had realized. The interview was closer than ever, and now he would have to hurry. Still, as he walked away, Marcus didn't feel regret. Helping her had felt right. And in his heart, he hoped that somehow, things would still work out for him that day. Marcus hurried down the street after helping the woman with her car, his heart beating faster with every step. He knew he had spent more time than he should have, but at that moment, helping her had felt like the only choice. His shoes tapped quickly against the pavement, and his mind raced as he tried to calculate how many minutes he had left before the interview. The building wasn't too far now, but even a few minutes of delay could ruin everything. As he rushed forward, his mind replayed the scene he had just left. The look of relief on the woman's face had been real, almost as though she had been waiting for a miracle. Marcus had always believed in kindness, even when it cost him something. He thought of his mother's words, how she had taught him since childhood that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. He had followed that lesson instinctively, and though he was nervous now about the time, he felt a quiet sense of peace in his heart. The streets were busier as he approached the main avenue. Cars honked, people walked briskly, and the noise of the city grew louder. Marcus tried to stay focused, weaving through the crowd with his briefcase in hand. He checked his watch again and saw that his interview time was drawing dangerously close. He took a deep breath, reminding himself not to panic. Maybe, he thought, if he explained honestly why he was late, they would understand. But a small doubt in his mind whispered that employers didn't usually forgive lateness, no matter the reason. As he hurried, his thoughts drifted back to the woman with the car. He wondered if she had managed to reach wherever she was headed safely. She had seemed important, dressed in a professional outfit, carrying herself with quiet confidence even in her frustration. Marcus hadn't asked where she was going, and it hadn't mattered. He only hoped she remembered his help not as an obligation but as a genuine act of kindness. The walk seemed longer than he remembered from his practice trip the day before. Every red light, Every slow group of pedestrians felt like an obstacle keeping him from his goal. By the time he reached the tall glass building that housed the company, Marcus was slightly out of breath. He paused for just a moment at the entrance, straightened his tie, brushed off the faint marks on his shirt, and whispered to himself, "Stay calm. Just be yourself." Inside the lobby, the polished floors and bright lights made the place feel grander than he had imagined. The receptionist sat behind a wide desk, greeting people as they entered. Marcus walked up, trying to catch his breath without appearing flustered. "Good morning," he said politely. "I'm here for an interview with your company." The receptionist glanced at him, then at the clock on the wall. Her expression softened but carried a hint of sympathy. "I'm afraid the interviews have already started," she said gently. "The candidates were scheduled earlier, and they've gone upstairs." Marcus felt his heart sink, but he quickly tried to gather himself. "I was on my way," he explained, "but I ran into someone who needed help with their car. I couldn't just walk past. I'm really hoping I can still be considered." The receptionist looked at him thoughtfully, then shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure if they'll take anyone else in now. But you can leave your resume here, and I'll make sure it gets to the hiring manager." Marcus handed her the neatly folded resume he had carried with such care. His hand trembled slightly as he gave it over. He had dreamed of sitting across from the interviewer, sharing his story, and showing them who he was. Leaving a piece of paper behind felt so incomplete, almost like his voice had been silenced before he even had the chance to speak. Still, he thanked the receptionist with a polite smile. "I appreciate your help," he said softly. Then he stepped aside, unsure of what to do next. He sat on a bench in the lobby for a few minutes, watching people come and go. Some employees walked with confidence, holding coffee cups and chatting about meetings. Others moved quickly, focused on their tasks. Marcus imagined himself among them, part of this fast-moving world, contributing, growing. But the vision felt farther away now, almost like a dream slipping out of reach. He stood up eventually, realizing he couldn't linger forever. He had done what he could. Now, it was out of his hands. As he walked back outside, the air felt heavier than before. The bright hope he had carried that morning dimmed slightly, though he tried not to let it break him completely. He reminded himself that opportunities came and went, and maybe another door would open. Still, as he walked down the street, he couldn't stop replaying the decision in his mind. Should he have kept walking past the stranded car? Should he have focused only on himself, on his future? The thought made him uneasy, because deep down, he knew he wouldn't have been able to ignore her. It wasn't who he was. And maybe, just maybe, that choice would mean something more than he realized. The rest of the day stretched long and quiet. Marcus returned to his apartment, loosened his tie, and sat on the edge of his bed. His briefcase now felt strangely empty without the resume inside. He stared at the floor, thinking about all the nights he had prepared for this chance. He thought about the questions he had practiced, the excitement he had felt. It was hard not to feel disappointment settling into his chest. But as the evening light filled the room, Marcus reminded himself of the promise he had made to live with integrity. He whispered softly, "I did the right thing." And though he didn't know it yet, the choice that had cost him his interview that morning was quietly shaping his future in a way he couldn't have imagined. Somewhere else in the city, the woman whose car he had fixed was also reflecting on the unexpected encounter. She had been struck not only by his willingness to help but also by the calm and respectful way he had done it. Most people might have walked by, but he hadn't. And though Marcus was unaware of it, their paths were not finished crossing. Marcus left the company building with heavy steps, his shoulders carrying the weight of both hope and disappointment. The streets outside were filled with people going about their day, but he felt almost invisible among them. The morning had started with such promise. He had pictured himself walking out of that interview with confidence, maybe even with a smile that hinted at a new beginning. Instead, he walked out holding nothing but the memory of a choice, helping a stranger instead of securing his own chance. The bus ride back home felt longer than usual. Marcus sat by the window, staring out as the city rolled past. Children laughed at a park, people lined up at food stalls, workers carried on with their busy schedules. Everyone seemed to be moving forward, while he sat still, wondering if he had just let his own life stall. He tried to remind himself that he had done the right thing, that helping someone in need was more important than being selfish. But another voice in his mind whispered that employers rarely cared about good intentions. They only wanted results. When Marcus reached his small apartment, he placed his briefcase on the table and sat down on the couch. The silence of the room seemed louder than the noise of the city. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands, and let out a long sigh. It wasn't just the missed interview, it was the months of struggle leading up to it. Each rejection, each unanswered application, each door closed, it all weighed on him. This interview had felt like a light at the end of the tunnel, and now the tunnel seemed darker again. Still, Marcus was not the type to give up. He had been through disappointments before, and he had always found a way to keep moving. After a few minutes of sitting in silence, he stood up and went to the kitchen to make himself a cup of tea. The warm drink calmed him, giving him a moment to think clearly. He told himself that tomorrow was a new day, and there would be other opportunities. Life had taught him that persistence was often the only key that worked. Later that afternoon, Marcus opened his laptop and began searching for new job postings. His resume file was still saved neatly on the desktop, and though he felt tired, he started applying to a few more positions. He knew the routine well: fill out forms, attach the resume, write polite cover letters, and hope for a reply. It was discouraging, but he refused to sit idle. Every application felt like planting a seed, even if he couldn't see the garden yet. As evening approached, Marcus decided to go for a walk. Sometimes, fresh air helped him clear his thoughts. The streets were calmer now, with the sun beginning to set and the sky turning shades of orange and pink. He walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, thinking about the day. A small part of him wished he could turn back time, arrive early to the interview, and still find a way to help the woman. But life didn't allow second chances like that. It only offered moments, and once those moments passed, all you could do was carry the memory of them. That night, Marcus called his mother. He didn't tell her about the disappointment right away. Instead, he asked how she was doing, listened to her stories about her day, and let her laugh warm his heart. When he finally shared what had happened, she was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "Son, you made a choice that showed your true character. Jobs will come and go, but who you are, that stays. You can't put a price on kindness. Don't ever think you lost today. You might have gained something bigger than you realize." Her words comforted him, though he still wasn't sure what she meant by something bigger. All he knew was that he had to keep faith. After the call, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind again and again until sleep finally claimed him. The next morning, Marcus rose early as usual. Even without an interview to prepare for, he believed in starting the day with discipline. He dressed neatly, went out for a short jog, and then sat down to check his emails. As expected, most were automated responses from companies saying they had chosen other candidates. He sighed but didn't let it break him. He was used to rejection, and each no simply meant he was one step closer to a yes. Meanwhile, across town, the woman whose car he had helped was sitting in her office. Her name was Evelyn Carter, though Marcus had never asked. She was the CEO of the very company where Marcus had applied for a job. She had gone straight to the office after her car started again, arriving just in time for an important meeting. All day, however, she couldn't shake the thought of the young man who had helped her. His suit, his polite tone, the way he had worked with patience and humility, all of it left an impression on her. Later, when she reviewed the list of interview candidates, she saw his name. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized it must have been him. The young man who had missed his chance was the same one who had stopped to help her. Evelyn was struck by the irony of it all. She had seen many candidates come and go, some polished, some nervous, but few with the kind of character Marcus had shown without even knowing who she was. Back in his apartment, Marcus remained unaware of this connection. He went about his day, continuing his search, running small errands, and keeping his spirit alive with small reminders of hope. He didn't know that his story was already unfolding in ways beyond his control. That evening, as he sat by the window with his notebook, jotting down goals for the week, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, unsure if it was just another automated call. But when he picked up, the voice on the other end was calm, confident, and surprisingly familiar. "Hello, is this Marcus Williams?" the woman asked. "Yes, this is Marcus," he replied, curious. "This is Evelyn Carter," she continued. "I believe we met yesterday, though you may not have realized it. You helped me with my car." Marcus froze for a moment, his mind struggling to connect the dots. The woman from the roadside? How did she know his name? Before he could ask, she continued. "I also happen to be the CEO of the company where you applied for a job. I noticed your resume and recognized you immediately. I wanted to call you personally." Marcus's heart raced. He sat up straighter, gripping the phone tightly. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Evelyn's voice was steady but warm. "I understand you missed the interview, but I also understand why. What you did yesterday told me more about your character than any interview could. Skills can be taught, Marcus. Integrity cannot. I'd like to invite you back to meet with me directly." For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and his eyes filled with tears he hadn't expected. All the disappointment he had carried seemed to melt into something new: hope, gratitude, and disbelief. "Thank you," he finally whispered. "Thank you so much for this chance." He hung up the call later with his hands still trembling, his heart beating faster than ever. He looked around his small apartment, almost laughing to himself. Life had a way of surprising him when he least expected it. The very choice he thought had cost him everything was now opening a door he hadn't even dared to dream of. Marcus lay awake that night, filled with a new kind of energy. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe his mother had been right. Sometimes, doing the right thing didn't take something away, it gave it back in ways you could never imagine. Marcus woke up the next morning with a mix of excitement and nerves that he could barely control. The phone call from Evelyn Carter the night before still echoed in his ears like a dream he couldn't quite believe had happened. He had gone to bed late, turning the conversation over in his mind again and again, smiling every time he remembered her words. He kept replaying the moment when she had said, "Integrity cannot be taught." Those words had given him strength, as if all the struggles of the past year had suddenly found meaning. He rose early, far earlier than usual, determined not to waste a single second. He laid out the same suit he had worn for the interview attempt, carefully brushing and pressing it until it looked neat again. He polished his shoes twice, checked his tie 3 times, and made sure his shirt was spotless. This time, there would be no distractions, no delays. He was going to meet Evelyn Carter face to face, and he was determined to make the most of the opportunity. As he stood in front of the mirror, Marcus reminded himself to breathe. He practiced his smile, not a forced one, but the calm and respectful expression he always wore when he wanted to show sincerity. He rehearsed what he might say to her, though he knew that words often slipped away when nerves arrived. Still, he wanted to be ready. When he stepped outside, the city air was crisp and full of energy. The sidewalks were alive with people, but Marcus felt like the world around him had slowed down. For once, he wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a man on his way to a meeting that could change his entire future. The bus ride felt different too. Every stop, every sound of the engine seemed to hum with possibility. As he approached the tall building again, the same one that had left him so disappointed just days ago, Marcus felt a surge of determination. This time, he wasn't walking in as a candidate lost among many. He was walking in with a personal invitation from the CEO herself. His steps were steadier, his shoulders straighter, though his heart still beat quickly with anticipation. At the reception desk, the same woman who had spoken to him before looked up in surprise when he introduced himself. "Miss Carter is expecting me," Marcus said politely, and this time, his words carried a quiet confidence. The receptionist nodded quickly and called upstairs before guiding him to the elevator. As the doors closed and the elevator began its smooth climb, Marcus took a deep breath. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal and whispered, "You belong here." It was something he hadn't always believed about himself, but today, he wanted to step into that truth. When the doors opened, a friendly assistant greeted him and led him down a bright hallway. The walls were lined with photographs of the company's achievements, awards, community projects, milestones. Marcus glanced at them as he walked, feeling both inspired and a little overwhelmed. He wondered if he would ever be part of something so significant. Finally, they reached a large office with glass walls and a view of the city skyline. Inside, Evelyn Carter stood by her desk, dressed smartly but with an approachable air. She smiled as soon as she saw him, and Marcus felt some of his nerves ease away. "Marcus," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm glad you could come." He shook her hand respectfully, his voice steady as he replied, "Thank you for inviting me, Miss Carter. I really appreciate this chance." "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "And call me Evelyn." Marcus sat down carefully, setting his briefcase beside him. Evelyn studied him for a moment, not in a harsh way but in a thoughtful one, as though she truly wanted to understand the person in front of her. "I want you to know," she began, "that I don't usually call candidates personally. But what you did the other day left an impression on me. You had a choice between your own opportunity and helping a stranger, and you chose kindness. That says a lot about your values." Marcus felt his cheeks warm slightly. "Honestly," he said softly, "I didn't think about it much at the time. She needed help, and I knew how to fix the problem. It just felt like the right thing to do." Evelyn nodded. "That's exactly the point. True character shows in the moments when no one is watching, when you have nothing to gain. And I saw your character that day." Her words filled Marcus with a quiet pride. He had always tried to live by the values his mother taught him, but he had never expected them to be noticed in this way. They talked for a long time after that. Evelyn asked him about his past jobs, his experiences, and what he hoped to achieve in his career. Marcus answered honestly, admitting the struggles he had faced but also emphasizing his determination to work hard and grow. He spoke of his desire to not only support himself but also to contribute meaningfully to the company he worked for. At one point, Evelyn leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You may not have the longest resume or the fanciest background, Marcus. But you have something I value deeply: integrity, dedication, and humility. These qualities can't be taught in a classroom. They come from within." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. For so long, he had wondered if anyone would ever see past the lines of his resume, past the lack of big titles or long experience. And now, here was someone who saw exactly who he was. After their conversation, Evelyn stood and walked him to the window, pointing out the bustling city below. "This company was built not just on skill, but on trust," she said. "Trust between employees, trust with our clients, and trust in ourselves. I believe you can be part of that." Marcus listened, his heart swelling with hope. "I'd like to offer you a position here," Evelyn said finally. "Not out of charity, but because I believe you have the potential to grow into someone who will make this company better. What do you say?" For a moment, Marcus could hardly find his voice. He had dreamed of this, but hearing the words directly felt surreal. He managed to nod, his eyes shining. "I would be honored," he said simply. Evelyn smiled. "Good. Then let's begin this journey." As Marcus left the office later, his steps felt lighter than ever before. The same building that had once felt like a symbol of rejection now represented a new beginning. The choice he had made on the street corner to stop, to help, to be kind had led him here in ways he never could have planned. On the bus ride home, Marcus looked out of the window with a quiet smile. He thought of his mother's words, of Evelyn's encouragement, and of his own belief that doing the right thing mattered. For the first time in a long while, he felt not just hopeful, but certain. His future was waiting, and he was ready to meet it with both hands open. Marcus walked out of the tall glass building with a sense of lightness in his chest that he had not felt in years. The air outside seemed fresher, the sun seemed brighter, and the city noise sounded almost like music. He carried no paper, no official contract in his hand, but he carried something far greater, a new beginning that had come not from clever answers or perfect timing but from something simple, choosing to help when he could have walked away. On the bus ride home, Marcus sat by the window, quietly replaying every moment of the meeting with Evelyn Carter. The way she had looked him in the eyes when she spoke, the way she had said that integrity mattered more than a polished resume, the way she had trusted him enough to give him a chance, it all felt like a dream. He leaned back against the seat, letting the rhythm of the bus soothe his racing heart. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "I got the job." When he reached his apartment, he placed his briefcase on the table, but this time, it no longer felt heavy with hope and fear. Instead, it felt like a symbol of a chapter he had completed. He immediately picked up the phone and called his mother. As soon as she answered, he could hear the warmth in her voice. "Son, how did it go?" she asked eagerly. Marcus smiled, his voice breaking with emotion. "Mama, I got it. She offered me the job. The CEO herself." There was a pause, and then the sound of his mother crying softly with joy. "I knew it," she said between her tears. "I told you that doing the right thing always comes back to bless you. I am so proud of you, Marcus." Her words filled his heart to the brim. He sat there with the phone pressed to his ear, listening to her blessings, and realized that this victory wasn't just his, it was hers too. She had raised him with values that had guided his every step, even the one that had made him late for the interview. The next week, Marcus started at the company. Walking through the grand lobby as a new employee instead of a nervous candidate felt surreal. He was given a modest role to begin with, but he embraced it with full dedication. Every morning, he arrived early, greeted everyone with respect, and approached his work with the same humility that had led him to help a stranger on the roadside. His colleagues noticed his attitude quickly. Though he was quiet at times, Marcus carried himself with steady confidence. When asked to handle tasks, he didn't just complete them, he made sure they were done well. He asked questions when he needed to learn, stayed late when something required extra effort, and offered to help others even when it wasn't part of his job description. In just a few weeks, he began to earn not just respect but also trust. Evelyn checked in on him from time to time. She never treated him with favoritism, but she always offered guidance when he asked. She admired how he never acted entitled, never once used their first meeting as a reason for special treatment. Instead, he seemed determined to prove himself through his actions every single day. One afternoon, as Marcus worked on a project with his team, he overheard one of his colleagues say, "That new guy, Marcus, he's different. He really cares about what he's doing." Hearing that made Marcus smile quietly to himself. For him, it wasn't about standing out, it was about being genuine. Months passed, and Marcus grew steadily in his role. He began to take on more responsibility, and his managers noticed his consistency. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. He had a way of suggesting ideas with thoughtfulness and clarity, and his work always matched his words. Outside of work, Marcus's life began to change too. With his steady income, he could finally pay his bills on time without worry. He started saving a little each month, dreaming of bigger goals. He was able to take his mother out to dinner, something he hadn't been able to do in a long time. He saw the pride in her eyes when she looked at him, and it gave him strength to keep pushing forward. But what touched Marcus the most was how his story began to spread quietly through the company. People heard about the man who had missed his interview because he stopped to help someone, only to discover that the person he helped was the CEO herself. Some colleagues asked him if the story was true, and Marcus would smile shyly and say, "Yes, but I didn't do it expecting anything. I just did what felt right." His humility only made the story more powerful. Soon, new employees were told about Marcus as an example of the company's values. Evelyn herself even mentioned him during a leadership meeting, saying, "We often talk about integrity as a word on paper, but Marcus reminded us that it's something you live through your actions." For Marcus, every day was still a journey. He knew success wasn't built in a moment, even one as surprising as helping the CEO on the roadside. It was built in small choices made daily with honesty, with hard work, and with kindness. He carried that belief into everything he did, and it continued to open doors for him. Years later, Marcus looked back on that morning the day he had left his apartment with hope, stopped to help a stranger, and thought he had lost his chance. That single decision had become the turning point of his life. What had seemed like a setback had revealed itself to be the greatest opportunity of all. When people asked him how he had managed to build a career from such a moment, Marcus always gave the same answer. "It wasn't about luck," he said. "It was about values. You never know who's watching, but even if no one is, doing the right thing will always guide you where you're meant to go." And as he stood in his office one evening, looking out over the city skyline just as Evelyn had once done, Marcus smiled. He had started as a man chasing opportunities, but he had grown into someone who created them through integrity, kindness, and the belief that no act of good is ever wasted.